Hello, I'm Elysia, and welcome to the Star Wars Canon Timeline podcast. This week's episode, A Flashback to the Old Republic, plays two roles. First, we begin with part 2 of mine and Marilyn's discussion of canon Star Wars folklore set in the Old Republic, covering 2 more Sith stories, plus a Shistavanen story about a member of the werewolf-looking Star Wars species we know will be turning up in the show Skeleton Crew, releasing December 2024. Then I talk through the first batch of Old Republic-based feedback sent in by listeners, maybe you. First with Jedi Bob, and then with Marcin. I'll keep this intro brief, but a couple pieces of housekeeping first. First of all, for the record, this episode was recorded in 4 parts. The feedback session with Marcin was recorded July 16th, the one with Bob, July 30th, my discussion with Marilyn, August 19th, and this intro and outro, September 22nd, all 2024. And the usual disclaimer applies. As far as we know, everything we've said is accurate at the time of recording, and I'll update you when and if any of this changes. Another important note, if you're listening as the episodes are released, you might have noticed that this is a flashback episode appearing at the end of the timeline in your feed, rather than in the Old Republic where it belongs. I've tried this flashback thing a few different ways now, and it seems listeners prefer when it's released at the current moment in the feed, as that most easily allows people to add it to their playlists. So I will do that, and then when I release the next episode, usually about 2 weeks later, this episode will be backdated to the right part of the timeline so that if you're listening to this later, you will see this at the right place in the timeline and get to listen to it in the timeline order in comparison to the other episodes. And I will probably use the same release methodology for future flashback episodes, but I would love to hear your feedback if you have thoughts. You can find the email swtimelinepodcast@gmail.com linked in the show notes. And Canon Padawaners stories and subscribers will, of course, always have this episode in release order in their subscriber feed. Also, quick note for Canon Padawans and Storiesins, watch out in your subscriber feed for a Spooktober bonus episode coming your way in October. Another Sith story, this one set in the Legends continuity about an infamous Sith Lord called Darth Nihilus, whom Marcin and I discussed in the Knights of the Old Republic games episode. I'm going to share a story from the comics about him. But right now, I've got some Sith stories for all listeners from the canon timeline about the Sith Lords Darth Noctis and Darth Sybaris. Let's bring Marilyn in to get that conversation started. Welcome back, Marilyn. We are back for part 2 of our Myths of the Old Republic. Thank you for joining us again.
Hi.
We had a great conversation the first time, so I'm excited to continue with more Sith stories, a werewolf story.
Yeah, no, I'm glad to be back. Thanks for keeping this going. It's going to be interesting, a lot of fun.
Yeah. So after we set the stage last time, and anyone who hasn't listened yet, I do recommend that you start there we talked about the differences between myths, fables, fairy tales, and legends, which is, again, not to be confused with the Star Wars definition of legends as an extended universe content.
Yeah.
It does get confusing, particularly in this.
It does indeed.
But yeah, we talked about a flood myth last time, and we talked about our first 2 Sith myths Sith stories about a Sith Lord named Darth Kaldoth. Mm-hmm. And we decided, I think, that those were mostly legends.
Yes.
Except the first.
The flood myth. You call it a flood myth, and I think rightly so, because it clearly is the sort of thing that does not refer back to something that happened in history or could have happened in history. But since you have a specifically named Sith Lord and you have, 2 stories about him and right. It's the sort of thing where, yes, you could pinpoint a place in history and say this is when it happened and this is where it happened and all that sort of thing.
And he's referenced later in history, so we know he existed. We don't know that the story is true, but we know he was a real person. Yeah.
So kind of like, a very dark version of Robin Hood or something like that.
Right. Yeah, because there's one that we're going to talk about today that is almost like it almost has that fairy tale opening, like literal reference to a princess.
Yes.
But then you would say it is no fairy tale.
What? No. No. I sit with Tolkien on this one, that fairy tales have happy endings, and that is a very important piece of their definition. Now, people could bring up exceptions to that, I'm sure, but to my understanding, if it doesn't have some kind of happy resolution, then it's something else. It's not quite a fairy tale.
Yeah, it's all sad stories today.
Yeah, which actually I'll have some things to think about that too.
Yeah, it is interesting that this is set. So this is again in the Old Republic. So the Sith stories, at least we know that they must be set after 5,000 because BBY, before the original movie, because that's when Sith came into being. They splintered off from the Jedi and formed their own order. And at least one of them before the Rule of Two, which was about 4,000 years later. So, but this is the Old Republic. This is a time we barely know anything about in canon. We're literally scrounging through myths and legends to find out the history, kind of like our world.
Digging through the rag bag of story.
Yeah. So
looking for scraps.
Today we're picking up with 3 more stories from George Mann's book, Dark Legends, which was released in 2019. And the stories we're going to talk about today are Life Immortal, Blood Moon, The Sleep of Ages. And the last one is an extra story from the special Target edition released in 2020. So that one's a bit harder to find. But we will talk you through all of them. 2 of these are also Sith stories featuring female Sith Lords who find unique solutions to the immortality question. So we'll talk about those first. And then we're going to finish with Blood Moon, which is a werewolf story of sorts, or rather I should say a mad Shistavanen story. I don't mean to malign his species. Did you see that there's a Shistavanen in the upcoming show Skeleton Crew?
I hadn't caught that detail. You know, I'm still...
Yeah, no, they just teased him in the trailer and at I think D23 it was. Yeah.
So I'll show my ignorance up front by saying, is this the same type of being as, oh dear, I'm blanking on his name. Sorry, folks.
Of Zeb, you mean?
Zeb, yeah.
Yeah. So he's the Shistavanen is the werewolfy one, and then there was another one like Zeb. So we'll talk about Elysia. So we'll talk about the Lasats also.
That was it. Sorry. Apologies to all Lasat lovers everywhere.
And since, you know Zeb, you know why he was strong enough to fight him off where the other ones failed.
Right.
Yeah. So yes, again, for these are canon stories, but that doesn't mean that they're true. They are stories that would have been passed down. I don't know. Would you say they're all legends today?
Probably. I'm kind of more interested in exploring the question of who's telling them and to who and to why.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Because I mean, yes, as we said, clearly the 2 Sith stories legends because potentially historical. Werewolf stories,
right.
That probably. I mean, it could be based on some historical actual planet that had the kinds of effects that we're going to be hearing about. But it's the werewolf piece that kind of takes it out of legend.
Right.
Folktale. Let's call it a folktale.
Okay.
Because
yes, I think that's how the author describes it. Yeah.
Is it? Oh, interesting. I'd forgotten that. No, I think the folktale is a better description because you do get folktale stories about, on this planet, wolves and how they behave. And I don't know if maybe they were concerned that wolves were too much like humans. And so they had to create this alternative scary thing. The problem, of course, is that wolves almost never attack humans.
No,
unless
it's
they're
true.
Either sick or their pups are threatened or something like that. They flee humans. They stay hidden. They have packs. They care for their children. I mean, they're lovely, wonderful creatures.
Absolutely.
And I think the story of the werewolf developed at a period of time when humans had started to venture further into forests, were clearing areas, were trying to, find extra land, which always seems to be the basis of wealth eventually, and encountering wolves, entering their territory and deciding to take it over and make it quote unquote safe. But you tell werewolf stories so your youngest children are not going to go wandering off in the woods. It's again, cautionary tale, perhaps.
Right. They're predator stories, Beware the big bad world outside.
Yeah. And it also, interestingly enough, the word wolf is used in some old Germanic cultures to describe a male outcast from society.
Right. A lone
who is
wolf.
forced to live
Mm-hmm.
outside the safe bounds of community and is therefore a wolf who preys upon community.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that kind of connection there. Maybe that is what led to this notion of a werewolf. I don't know.
Yes. Yeah. Always blame the people they shoved out in the first place.
You've heard of a scapegoat, have you?
Yeah. Okay, but before we get deeper into the werewolf story, we're going to start with the two Sith stories, talk about them a bit together, because they both feature female lords who find different forms of immortality, for better or worse. And yeah, as I said, they're set between 5,000 and 1,000 BBY because they're Sith stories. The first, at least. The second could be set later. It's unclear because it's, but I'm guessing before that, because she's apparently going out and checking things out in the galaxy in between, being all Sithy, fighting people. So yeah, it must be before the rule of two kicked in.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, we have A Life Immortal and The Sleep of Ages, which is from the Target edition of Dark Legends, the second one. And to summarize the Life Immortal plot, Darth Noctis was a very powerful Sith who could have conquered the entire galaxy, but she became focused on another goal, immortality. She searched for long-lost knowledge and relics, eventually making her way to the Sith world of Exegol. For months, she explored the deep ruins, eventually finding a mutated feral beast of a man in the depths. The creature knew what she sought and led her deeper into the citadel, eventually reaching a chamber. The chamber contained the records of Darth Sanguis, who had achieved the immortality Noctis sought. The creature served Noctis as she studied these records until she was eventually ready to perform the ritual herself. The creature's last service to her would be, as she thought, a non-voluntary sacrifice, but the creature seemed to understand this and offered himself up to her knife. She plunged her dagger into his heart as the chamber sparked with energy. She felt invigorated as her body started to shift and change as the energy flowed into her, but joy became anguish as her body convulsed and her spine twisted. Noctis awoke some time later, seeing the lifeless body of the creature with a wicked grin on its face, realizing it had known all along. She had followed in the footsteps of Darth Sanguis, and she was now just like him, a grotesque version of her former self, cursed to eke out a painful, lonely existence in the bowels of Exegol until she could find another Sith to put her out of her misery. What did you think of this story overall?
Kind of spooky, kind of gruesome. It really made me ask, how are we defining immortality?
Right, exactly.
And why do we want it?
Yeah.
And what do we envision it to be? And how are we going to be within it?
Yeah.
And I can, jumping ahead a little bit here, I can see this story being told to Jedi younglings,
right,
as an example of, why you don't want to be a Sith kind of thing. But also, it could be a good starting point for a conversation about, well, what do we mean by immortality?
Right.
And, living forever. And, are we the ones who talk the way a recent character did on a recent TV series about the joy of becoming one with the Force and being able to witness that, and so on and so on.
Right. Yeah.
Force ghosts and all these other things that we've seen so far. This is just a completely different notion of what immortality means.
Right. No, I hadn't considered, you make a very good point about how it could be a story of warning, like don't become a Sith because you are seeking this, but you will really be punished yourself. And that makes a lot of sense, maybe even more sense than what I was thinking, which, although there's also, I think, a certain sense in what my theory was that it was a Sith story passed down to keep people away from Exegol.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I can absolutely see that too. But sooner or later, if it got around to the Jedi, they could make use of it as well. And
right.
I really enjoyed that Exegol appears in this because it was something I knew. Right. I know where that is. I know what happens on that planet.
So for anyone who doesn't know, Exegol, it's a dark desert planet. It was once fertile, as a lot of Sith planets were. It's in the unknown region. So this is an area of space. It's very difficult to navigate, making it difficult to get there. And it's an important world for the Sith dating back to ancient times. It's a hideout of sorts, and it plays a big role in the sequel trilogy. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so the only way that because it's in the unknown regions, they need to have a Sith wayfinder. So it's shaped like a holocron, which you talked about as like a data bank. But this is specifically designed to unlock the unknown regions, so that makes it extra hard to find Exegol. It's through something called the Red Honeycomb Zone, which is also known as the more descriptive Ship Eater or Blood Net. So this is, it's a web of hyperspace anomalies that make getting through into the unknown regions without these special Sith wayfinders like a death sentence, basically.
So are all the Sith wayfinders set just to find Exegol, or do they do other things as well?
I think there might be one, maybe two set to Exegol that we've seen in the lore.
Yeah, we've seen two.
Mm-hmm.
We've seen two.
Yeah.
But
I don't know if those are the same, because it would be like complex.
Yeah.
One. Yeah.
Sure. The shape of it has always reminded me of the very, very thick glass, I'll call them tiny portholes that are put into the wooden side, the side of the ship, a wooden ship. They're almost pyramid, but not quite. And I think the idea is to let in some light.
Right.
Without having to have any further mechanism to make it lighter in the in the hull of the ship, in the bowels of the ship.
Right.
Say. Very beautiful things. You see them used as paperweights and things now.
Yeah. Yeah, but this just shows that Noctis really had to search high and low for a way to get there.
Mm-hmm. But again, that almost an echoing of ships voyaging.
Right.
Seeking things and needing light to find the way, although I don't suppose that the Sith would necessarily use the light analogy.
the dark to find the way. I don't know. Yeah. The power of the Force. And from the story, to quote the story, it says, Exegol is a blighted place, and its atmosphere charged with fierce electrical storms, its surface ravaged by the excavations carried out there by the Sith. So basically, they just studied this planet to death, which is kind of very human, actually. I just think about early Egyptology, especially.
Oh, yeah. Well, the amount of information that they didn't know definitely exceeded the amount of information that they did know, which was minuscule and a lot of it incorrect anyway. But, yeah, it's how do you, well, of course, Tolkien's answer to that was Gandalf's. Someone who breaks a thing to find out what it is made of has left the path of wisdom.
That's kind of a Sith way, I guess. Yeah. How much of this story do you think might be factual?
Well, Exegol.
Right.
Exists.
And I'm pretty sure we've also had call outs to Noctis too, when they were listing Sith names in later periods.
So Noctis is canon as having existed in the way that Darth Caldeth is. Okay.
Or at least a legend. Known legend. Yeah,
as for the rest of it, I mean, if they read Lord of the Rings, they'd know about Gollum. And that's what I just kept thinking with this creature. It's like, oh, Gollum. Pitiful. Offering self as sacrifice, sort of. I mean, in a very twisted manner.
Well, I should say that the illustrations for both of these books that we were talking about last episode and this episode were done by Grant Griffin. Do you want to read what he said about this illustration, the purple text?
Sure. He says, as this story was one of the last to be added, and due to approaching print deadlines, I had to proceed with the illustration without knowing whom or what the main characters were. What I did know was that this story took place on Exegol and was going to have a strong Dr. Frankenstein and Igor vibe. At the time, I only had the trailer visuals to go off of. Inspired by a screenshot, I built up the scene and shrouded our Sith in a hood to hide their identity. With a bit of force lightning to showcase the villain's power, I was able to increase the drama in the composition. The curved saber was added later, and, if I'm not mistaken, is specific to a particular Sith.
Yeah, so that's, I guess, basically what we know about Darth Noctis is that she somehow has a curved red lightsaber.
which I find fascinating because it's a classic medieval trope for Saracens.
Saracens?
Saracens. The scimitar, the curved sword.
Okay. Oh, right.
Was almost always stood in as a symbol for what they called Saracens, what we would call Muslim.
Okay.
Or Arabs or Moors.
Right.
We're speaking around time of the Crusades.
I wonder if anyone who speaks Arabic sees any link with the word noctis.
Oh, that'd be interesting to know. Yeah.
I mean, I assume it almost sounds a little Latin to me, like nocturnal.
Oh, yeah. That's what I thought. What I thought. But no, the scimitar definitely says, the curved lightsaber, I should say, definitely says scimitar to me, which in the wider culture, I think just means, okay, the sword of the other.
Okay.
However they're wanting to define that. And Tolkien does the same thing. He gives scimitars to the orcs.
My brain went to science, even though I know better. And I'm like, how does it hold a curved shape like that?
Right. No, that was my first question.
I accepted the light wick, but no. So this is a description of the Igor character from the story. And Griffin, the illustrator, had not read this when he drew the illustration, but it does match up perfectly. It says its spine was twisted at an unusual angle, causing it to hunch forward so that its left shoulder dipped almost to its knees. Its flesh was pallid and translucent, shriveled and wrinkled so that its immense age was evident but unreadable. Its stringy hair fell in strands down the side of its face, limp and thick with grime. It wore only rags that might once have been fashioned as clothes. So, yeah, very Gollum indeed. Dark Gollum.
Absolutely. And even in the image, sorry to listeners who can't see it.
But the image matches that description exactly.
Yeah, I mean, it really looks like Gollum and his movements and motion and everything.
I do wonder if he did the illustration first and then George Mann went back in there, or if it just happened to me.
Well, I think the Gollum image is probably much more in the zeitgeist than Igor is now. I mean, at one point, or Igor, if you like.
Right.
Definitely would have been a go-to, but in this case, that image in particular just cemented Gollum for me.
Yeah.
Which is ironic.
Well, yeah, it's kind of like the anti-Gollum in a way.
Yeah, exactly.
Path away from redemption.
Mm-hmm.
I also found interesting Dark Noctis's philosophy that she was like, I don't want, it's kind of she and also the next Sith we're going to be talking about have this idea, like, what's the point of conquering the world if I'm not around to enjoy being queen of everything? And that seems like their drive for searching for immortality first. They're like, I have so many years and I want to create more than I want to do something with the years I was granted.
I guess in both cases, well, at least in this story, the idea is that they don't really know how they are going to be existing forever.
Yeah.
They certainly don't envision this outcome for themselves after they've done the spell and gotten the immortality. So that's another reason why I really don't think this is a Sith story. I mean, it's certainly about Sith, but it has such a clear, and the moral of this story is wishing for immortality will bring you nothing but suffering.
Right. I mean, and I would argue I tend to be drawn to stories that talk about legacy is the real immortality.
Yeah. The notion, sure, if you can't enjoy them forever, you might get miffed about that. But if you can't enjoy them at all, what's the point?
Yeah. Maybe the galaxy lucked out, though. The fact that she was like, no, I want something more than conquering all you fools.
Well, sure. I mean, even entropy tells us that, things are falling apart all the time. The laws of the universe, nothing lasts forever.
Yeah.
So, sooner or later, but here we have a specific example of how that might in fact take place. But she's just going to have to wait and hope. Some other dumb Sith comes along and tries to do the same thing. But of course, that can't be dumb because of all the intelligence that's required to figure all this stuff out, right?
Yeah. I love how the story ends. It is a very creepy ending. Noctis had given her entire life in pursuit of the secret of immortality, ignoring all else, sundering entire worlds in her quest to live forever. And now the voices whispered that she had earned what she had so long desired. She was as close to immortality as one could be, destined to live a life undying and yet unable to truly live.
Yeah.
Bum, bum, bum. Yeah, I mean, I think there maybe is a don't become a Sith warning in there more than like leave Exegol alone warning.
Well, I think you can see both. And
Yeah, Jedi don't want the other Jedi to flirt with one of the darkest planets in the galaxy either.
sure, because who knows what else might be there,
Right.
just in terms of technology or other sorts of things. And this very basic statement in the beginning of explaining why she was doing all this, she desired one thing above all others: the perpetuation of her own life. And right there, you have a classic statement of, yes, your life is important, and so is everyone else's.
Mm-hmm.
And if your only goal in life is to live as long as you possibly can, well, already you know that you're limited.
Right.
So how long is long enough for you?
Right.
And if nothing is enough except forever, well, okay.
I mean, you're going to do it alone. I don't know. I mean, I guess she'd been alone this far because we don't even hear of her having, because a lot of Sith in their quest for immortality, they basically get a research assistant who they teach
Mm-hmm.
how to fight.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't hear anything about her having an apprentice.
I don't picture that from the
Yeah.
things that we got. No, I don't think she felt she had time for it. She had more important things to do. I mean, that it has always puzzled me about the rule of two is, how can you be so sure that, and of course you can't, because the expectation is the
Right.
apprentice is going to kill you anyway.
Right.
So if you're seeking immortality, yeah, you're not going to get an apprentice if
Right.
that's what's supposed to happen, right?
Well, it is amazing if you think about it that the rule of two went on for 1,000 years after Darth Bane started. So this would be before that, I guess, when there's more Sith out there. So if some Sith want to be lone wolves, I guess they can do their thing. But then you think for 1,000 years, it was imperative that each Sith did choose an apprentice to pass it on, or else the order just would have died.
Yeah, I mean, I began to question that more and more as other stories of the Star Wars universe have been told. At one point we thought, well, in Order 66. Am I spoiling way too many things here with your timeline?
Yeah, no, we can't talk about Order 66. I'll bleep that out. But this is the climatic event from the end of the prequel.
Yeah, I won't follow this line of argument then, because there's too much spoilery stuff there. Well, maybe I can just say, the one thing we know is that even those who try to destroy all the Jedi can't quite manage it, because the universe is a very big place and the galaxy alone is a very big place. So.
Right. Or to say there is something in Legends where there's a lost tribe of Sith, which is basically before the rule of two was implemented, or like a group got marooned somewhere basically and formed their own society and stuff, and they pop up later. So I could definitely see something like that happening in canon as well.
Yeah, I just don't see how the Sith could be certain that all the Sith were destroyed.
Right. Yeah,
and
especially if they have all these. Yeah.
Even if they had been, there's still enough Sith lore lying around, presumably, for anyone drawn to the dark side to say, hey, I'm going to start up my own Sith cult here.
Yeah, we're talking about all these stories about Sith, like planet hopping around the galaxy looking for old Sith temples. It's out there.
Yeah. So where do they all come from? And do they have apprentices? I don't think so.
I don't know. Maybe. Or maybe some of them called themselves new names, like, the Ren.
Right. Yes, I'm definitely looking forward to learning more about the whole Ren thing. I hope we get that at some point.
Any other quotes or ideas you wanted to shout out from this story?
I found it interesting that this feral beast calls her mistress. What did you think of that?
I have to say I did clock pretty early on how this was probably going to end. And I think that is one of the reasons I thought that was like mocking in a way.
Oh, okay. Interesting.
yeah, just being, because she's so unbelievably arrogant. Like,
Yeah.
she's just like,
You don't say.
it's just insanely arrogant. And again, this could be, this is a folk tale. This could be an exaggeration, but most likely is. But yeah, she just really is blinded by her own arrogance. So all he has to do is like kiss up to her in the slightest possible way, and she'll just fall into the trap.
I mean, that is a common Sith trope, I think, of, haha, you thought that you had overcome me, but really, this is what it is. Dun, dun, dun. I mean, you do get a fair bit of that going on. And I love this sentence. There, amongst the glorious mess, were the answers she had sought for so long.
Yeah.
Glorious mess. I guess one person's glorious mess is another person's task to have to clean up.
I live in a glorious mess. No, I'm
well, I'm with you. I mean, they say that creatives usually have glorious messes, and they work better and create better when they have glorious messes around them. So
everything has to be at hand, even if it means duplicates around the house.
It interests me how often a Sith Lord eventually has themselves in a position where they say, I foresaw it. You followed step by step in the plan that I laid out for you to follow. And so we get,
and that's why I wondered if it was a Sith story, because it still has that tone of like, see how smart.
It could be. I mean, by the time you get high up in the ladder of Sith knowledge, I suppose that becomes your focus more than, would you rather be smart or would you rather be happy? But I just think that the quote that you read early on here, she was as close to immortality as one could be, destined to live a life undying and yet unable to truly live. That doesn't sound like a Sith moral to me. Maybe it was originally a Sith story, and this is a Jedi version of it,
That's true. And
they were taking the same basic folktale and drawing different conclusions from it.
Yeah.
And that happens too, I think, in our world.
Yeah, it crosses lines for sure, because, a lot of the Sith will be secretly infiltrated in the Jedi and what might pass those stories back for sure.
Sure.
Yeah, and then somebody interprets it differently. All right, so let's contrast it with the other story, The Sleep of Ages, which again, from the Target exclusive edition. So sorry about that. It's super annoying. Don't do that. It's annoying for people who live abroad. But I have to really thank the person who helped me get my hands on this. So the summary of the story is, according to legend, there existed a tomb of a beloved princess on a moon in the far reaches of wild space, filled with treasures from a vast forgotten empire. An archaeologist named Lorith was one of many to become fascinated with the story, scouring the galaxy for clues to the location of the tomb, which led her to look for a non-existent moon of the planet Salanis, before landing on a small planetoid named Salanis. First one, Selanus. The place where she actually went, Slanis. So yeah, easy to confuse them.
I think it was Salanis.
Sorry, what I said. But okay, so she landed there with a few assistants and began to excavate. And after months of failure, they finally found an ancient tomb buried in a hillside. Inside were the treasures they were seeking, but more surprisingly, there was a woman preserved in a slab of carbonite, presumably the legendary princess. In the days that followed, while her team cataloged the relics, Lorith became increasingly drawn to the carbonite slab. Eventually, not knowing why, she found herself activating the slab's controls. Lorith was thrilled to find the quote-unquote princess inside was still alive, until, stepping out of her entombment, the figure released a stream of lightning from her hand. It was a Sith Lord named Darth Sybaris, who had devised her own method of immortality. She'd spread tales around the galaxy about a wealthy princess and her vast empire, and every few generations the tale would lure a treasure seeker to her tomb, and she would drain her newest victims of their life, thus keeping herself young and beautiful as she searched the galaxy for a worthy foe. until the next time she decided it was time to sleep and wait for the next era for a hero worth conquering. So, yeah, I said, Darth Noctis, eat your heart out. Darth Sybaris got the Empire and immortality, though her empire did indeed crumble without her. But the stories live on, so she got that kind of immortality as well. What do you think about Darth Sybaris in comparison with Darth Noctis?
Well, I'd kind of missed the brief line there that says, she would drain the victims of life, thus keeping herself young and beautiful, as she searched the galaxy for a worthy foe. I mean, that it's such a short bit that it can be missed because
that was very quick at the end. Yeah.
And again, I was thinking, well, okay, you're immortal, but you're immortal in carbonite. So what fun is that? I mean, ask Han Solo, right?
Right. She's sleeping through most of her immortality, but waiting.
Yeah.
I guess, in
Talk
that
about
way,
beauty sleep.
Yeah. In that way, it's like someone who gets what do you call it? Cryogenic freezing in our world.
Oh yeah.
In the hope, but at least with carbonite, you have a much better assurance that you're going to wake up.
You're going to wake up. Yes, it's the technology has been proven, so that you can set that thing aside.
So carbonite, of course, is something we see in the original trilogy, and it is basically it's carbon freezing, and it's the ultimate form of preservation because it's better than the cryo procedures in our world, but it's still deemed somewhat dangerous. So no spoilers about the original trilogy, but there's a character who goes into a carbonite slab in a memorable sequence, and there's the line like, "Wow." There's a little worry that the character might not make it, but it was used by early spacers. So even before the Skiff and the Galleon story they talked about in the canon ancient myths of Batuu. And so the early spacers would use it to preserve themselves for long voyages before there were hyperdrives that got them there faster. And this would often lead to hibernation sickness. So it's not exactly like beauty sleep per se. She probably wakes up feeling a little icky and disoriented, like a bad jet lag.
Well, unless she's figured out a remedy for that, clever Sith lady. She certainly could have.
Yeah, clever Sith lady, but I don't know. Yeah, if this is a long time ago, who knows? Maybe she did. By the way, in Legends, the Krath were a dark side cult formed by the descendants of Empress Teta, who is a mythical emperor warriors, and they took over the system that was originally known as the Korra system, now known as the Empress Teta system, and this is where carbonite comes from. So this might have happened maybe even before the story we're talking about today. They did keep their enemies as trophies on the wall, so I don't know if she had any
charming
any special relationship with that planet, or just ravaged it for their carbonite. But in later times, technology, people do not use this unless they're certain crime lords who don't really care whether their bounty lives or dies.
But or certain bounty hunters who don't care to be bothered by the bounties that they have captured.
Yeah, exactly. But it's mostly used in later times for like industrial transportation to keep volatile things steady and things like that.
That point was made clear in the second of the 3 original trilogy films.
Yeah. And it is, so the Sith temple we see here is in wild space. So I do wonder if any future lore might link this and the Darth Rye Nimbus story that we talked about last time. Because they didn't name the temple in that one, but it was also a moon in wild space.
Well, I'm thinking of traditional starts to legends, fairy tales, and so forth, long ago and far away, once upon a time, as far away as Celador, to use an Earthsea example. So you could say, in the fabled system of Empress Teta or something like that.
Right.
Just to indicate in general, a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away.
Well, Empress Teta exists, but in the Selanus, or however they're pronounced, they are inventions for this story.
Well, I mean, you and I know it existed, but you could posit cultures or planets or whatever where they didn't necessarily know. They just overheard a spacer talking about it sometime and had no clue what it was, and just said, okay, as far away as whatever that thing is.
We grew up saying Timbuktu, which is a real city, but like we didn't know anything about it. Just far away.
Precisely.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
I also have to point out that Lorth, the archaeologist character, is a Thelan, which is like Jackie from the Acolytes is half Thelan.
Cool.
So Thelans are known for their head horns. They have like 3 horns on each side of their temples sticking out, and they're like colorful with some spotted skin. So yeah, just pointing that out.
Hence the similarity between the word Thelan and feline.
Although the Zagarians are more cat-like.
Well, they couldn't be too obvious about it, could they?
Yeah. So who do you think is telling this story? Do you think this is... Because this one kind of paints her in a more victorious light. But it's also... It feels almost to me like a campfire ghost story.
Well, you're switching the hero character, if you will, or the viewpoint character, from the archaeologist to the Sith lady.
Mm-hmm.
So who is the real hero?
Right.
And what was the intention? I mean, the fact that the Thelan lady found what she sought for so many years isn't in and of itself a kind of an accomplishment. Mm-hmm. But it could also be the sort of be careful what you ask for because you just might get it sort of thing.
Right. Right. Or a parental warning that could have passed around, during a time when there's a lot of people exploring and disappearing into wild space or into the edges of off the map.
Sure. So, you want to be a space explorer? Well, listen to this story about this space explorer.
Right.
just for a little parental insurance here before you go off into the wild. Do know that it might not end well for you.
Yeah. Be careful who you idolize or what you idolize, what lifestyle.
Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah, it is. I mean, I was getting a lot of Indiana Jones sorts of vibes.
Yeah.
From this. I don't know if the archaeologist was going to go back and give lectures and teach people about the strange cultures that they found, but
it felt personal with her.
Yeah. Also, there's the whole don't push a button unless you know what's going to happen, right?
Yeah.
She's seeing this thing there. A bit of Pandora's box going on. She didn't have to wake up whoever was inside there. She could have just taken all the treasures and the knowledge and left.
Yeah. It's a good boogeyman story because it's like Sybaris could still be out there.
Sure.
Ready to snatch bad little children.
Yeah. So again, legend, but I don't know. I guess I tend to think that, the original children's stories might just be about their own planets first.
Yeah.
But I don't live in a galaxy in which there is this multiplanetary perspective. So,
so there is a reference to, there's an artifact called the Hand of Sybaris. And I have to assume that it's connected with this character. We talked about in the last episode how the writer of these stories, George Mann, collaborates with Cavan Scott, who's another really prolific Star Wars writer, even more prolific Star Wars writer. And so this is in a Path of Vengeance, is a High Republic Phase 2 book. So it's one of the ones that I'm going to be talking about with it's actually, I think, was it one of John's favorite ones? Anyway, no, Path of Deceit, I think. Anyway, but in that book, there is a forbidden ancient Sith artifact, a gauntlet, which is kept in a vault on Jedha, which is the planet. It's in Rogue One, where all these different types of Force users gather. And so that seems to be confirming her as real, or at least real legend.
This is a genuine legend. Yes. We have established. Somebody else was telling this story before I told it to you.
Anything else you wanted to shout out about this story?
Well, again, if you're handed immortality, all you're going to do with it is just try to find the world's best hero and kill them. I mean, it's, I don't know how much consciousness you have when you're in carbonite. So, I mean, it'd be one thing if she could be, frozen there at her carbonite throne, be able to watch and hear and think, ha ha ha, wait until you come over here. And
I think not. I think she's out.
No, I do too. My understanding of carbonite freeze is that you are definitely out of it. And the fact that she can even respond so quickly after being released from it says at least that she's learned more about it because of other things that we learn about, you're saying about hibernation sickness.
Yeah. Yeah. So. I mean, I guess it speaks to the idea of, with people, people set goals for themselves and they say it's not even as healthy as goals, that people will set these mileposts for themselves. And they will say, if I achieve this thing, then my life will be valid and I will have achieved, nirvana fulfillment. And actually, and the Buddhists will come out and say, no, this is the opposite.
Exactly. This is samsara to the hilt, my friend.
Right.
Because you are utterly attached and trapped in your own creation.
I mean, maybe she's never going to be happy. That's for sure. But maybe she gets to at least see the future at some point. I hope when she comes out, she at least goes out and has a good look around.
Well, if all she's looking for in her good look around is, okay, where's the biggest bully that I can now, cut down to size, that doesn't really sound like a terribly fulfilling life to me. Or even a half-life. From the moment the poison has touched their lips.
Any other thoughts on this story? Or the Sith stories in general?
Again, it's an interesting thing to me that they're positing a galactic culture in which people travel around a lot and go to different and strange places, and yet it almost seems to be saying, don't be too curious. Be careful where you start poking into stuff. Make sure that what you're looking for is, in fact, something worth looking for. Was the archaeologist hoping to become famous for their knowledge, or rich beyond their dreams, or what was it that was driving them on? I mean, I suppose you could argue just answering questions,
right,
is a worthwhile goal as a scholar. But
it seemed to be her personal obsession was to figure this out.
Yeah, wanting to prove that it was a true story. But of course, in the end, she doesn't even get to do that.
It's like looking for Atlantis and then drowning when you find it.
Right. Very good analogy. Yes, I agree.
Oh, Laura, rest in peace. Sybaris, I've been very good this year. Please don't come get me.
Well, if you're not going out looking for her, I don't think you're going to need to worry about her.
Oh, I don't know. This is my danger. Is like I relate too much with Faust. What would I not do for knowledge? Okay, this is a good spot for a quick break. When we come back, we've got not only a mad Shistavanen story for you, but also our first Old Republic mailbag with thoughts from the community. Talk to you in a sec. The last story we're going to talk about, we're breaking away from the Sith stories. This one does have more of a dark fairy tale, dark folklore feeling.
Yes, definitely.
This is our quote-unquote werewolf story, Blood Moon. And this has got to take place during or after Darth Bane's time, during the implementation of the Rule of Two. It probably actually takes place at the start of the High Republic or the very end of the Old Republic. So set much later than the other ones we've talked about. But still centuries before the Acolytes or even the books that we're going to be talking about. And then the reason I know this is because the story says that the astronomical anomaly that drives the story didn't exist through at least most of the Old Republic. It seems to be something that happened later in the Old Republic. So the summary is, a human woman named Fionn Tukat was once led an expedition to the moon of Lupal to study the civilization that once flourished there. She was joined by 2 excavation droids designated HTC-10 and RFU-5, a woman named Romina Foss, a one-eyed Lasat called Borzel, a Togruta named Cavrolo Sis, and Cordus Vrak, a Shistavanen, a race that resembled what we know as werewolves in appearance, but not generally temperament. Lupal was said to have been a paradise where a great civilization flourished until the dying star it orbited cracked its pure kyber core, causing vast solar flares of dark side radiation. The red flares were said to twist people's minds, but this did not dissuade Tukat's expedition. However, as they set up camp, the eerie light did indeed seem to affect all of their moods. The normally gentle and calm Vrak seemed to be affected by it more intensely. A minor disagreement about who was going to take first watch resulted in a fight between Borzel and Vrak. Eventually, Sis and Tukat were able to settle things down, and the team called it a night. However, come morning, there were signs of a struggle. Borzel was missing, and his blaster was discarded on the ground. The next evening, Borzel was still missing, and the crimson flares were continuing to intensify. Vrak became transfixed on the light and, in a rage, began to attack the team. HCT-10 and Sis were the first to succumb to the beast that Vrak had become. Foss and Tukat fled into the ruins from their former friend, but Vrak fell upon Tukat. As Foss ran toward the safety of their ship, Borzel returned, slamming into Vrak. Foss and RFU-5 powered up the ship as Borzel and Vrak fought. Borzel knocked Vrak down and made it to the ship before it took off. As the ship left the moon, Vrak left howling on the surface. A new solar flare reached into the supposedly safe cockpit, and Borzel looked toward Foss with his lips drawn back in a feral snarl. Rawr.
Bum, bum, bum.
So, Lupal, this planet is an invention for this story, allegedly once home to a great civilization. We already touched a little bit on the species, and I don't want to overwhelm you with too many species at once, but just to run through the characters in the story. So we have Fionn Tukat and Romina Foss are human. We have the 2 excavation droids, HTC-10 and RFU-5. So the excavation droids are a new type of droid, which it makes sense for archaeology. Mm-hmm. And we have Cavrolo Sis. He's a Togruta, which is the same species as Ahsoka. Mm-hmm. And we talked about Borzel is a Lasat, like Zeb from Rebels. And we've got Vrak, our Shistavanen, our wolf-like one. So the Shistavanen, they're werewolf-like in appearance. They have clawed paws, red or yellow glowing eyes, but they are generally, peaceful. They're personable. They show up throughout the canon as background characters. They've been, there was actually a Shistavanen in the background in the original film, but then was cut out in later versions, I guess because he looked a little schlocky.
Was he in the bar?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that makes sense.
And now, we have this story. This is one of the most prominent stories in canon now, but we also have them showing up in the background in High Republic books, things like that. So, and we're getting a Shistavanen character in Skeleton Crew, apparently. So that's exciting. They are from the forested world of Uvenna Prime in the Outer Rim. So this is a world of forests and vast oceans and cave systems. Like I want to move there. And in Legends, they were partially the product of genetic engineering and politically isolationist, but that's Legends. So could be true, might not be true. I guess the politically isolationist part would explain why we don't see that many of them. And so we'll get a character, but that's in Era 7, the Mandalorian era in Skeleton Crew. So right. I know some people prefer the Baby Grogu dating system to the BBY dating system. But that's centuries after this. So what did you think of the story overall?
Well, it's an interesting story to be recording about on the day of a full moon.
Right. It's a super moon, right? Because it's extra close to the...
Yes.
We're recording on the 19th of August, so yeah.
And it's also a blue moon.
Right.
Because it's the
second full
moon. And yeah. There's always been stories about the power of moons.
Right.
Well, our single moon on this system. I don't know if other people on other systems with more than one moon tell stories or not. But it has, it has gravitational pull. It affects the oceans. So the idea that it wouldn't affect human creatures who are made up of the vast majority of water.
Right.
If it can pull the tides of the ocean, it can pull the tides of humans. And of course, it often has an effect on the menstrual cycle.
Exactly what I was thinking. Yeah. Which is
very,
liquid,
very.
Sorry to say, but
No. It's a very, very potent image.
Mm-hmm.
So very easy to tell stories about it, particularly if you're telling a story around a campfire and it's dark and the moon is full.
Yeah.
Yeah,
this definitely feels like a campfire tale to me.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, this that we were talking about earlier, a story told to discourage children from wandering off in the woods in the dark at night.
The night is dark and full of terrors. Yeah.
Yeah, which is sad because it doesn't have to be.
Right. Well, I mean, it doesn't necessarily mean that every parent would be scaring their kids with a story, but I can definitely see. I was the kid at like camp at when we went camping. I would be around the fire telling ghost stories to kids, freaking them out.
Of course, you would.
I would tell this story.
And I'd be the kid with their head under a blanket being freaked. So there you go. We need both in the world.
But yeah, no, I can see that it's also a lot of these, these stories from the Old Republic take place on distant moons and unknowable places during an unknowable time.
Well, and the notion that most myths or legends have a kernel of truth in them.
Yeah.
So here's this entire crew going to land on the planet thinking, there's nothing wrong with this. Even though we hear all these stories that it's a dangerous place to be, we're scientists, we're explorers, we don't have credulous beliefs in this sort of thing. So.
Right. I highlighted a quote from the story. Would you mind reading it?
Sure. Tukat and the others had heard those tales too, but had long before dismissed them as fear-mongering, believing them to be the sort of stories passed around by explorers such as themselves to dissuade others who might consider plundering Lupal for the abandoned treasures they wished to protect for their own gain. So there again, I mean, has any of these stories not had the theme of your own gain, of greed? It really seems to me that has been the core theme for all of these, except the story in which the youngest sister rescues her sibs. And that happens to be the only one that I consider to be a genuine fairy tale in all the stories that we've talked about.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, from the ancient myths, I would say the one from the one with the skiff and the galleon. I don't think
that's that's a happy ending. No, you're right. You're right.
But yeah, no, I mean, I see. And I wonder, these 6, the 3 we talked about last time and the 3 today, they are all stories that I'm tying to the Old Republic. I mean, because they appear to be set there, at least marginally. And I wonder there's a sort of, even with the tales from legends, there's like, because it's the era where the Sith held the most sway, and because it's so far in the past, the stories are not clear, the way we look thousands of years in our own past and make guesses based on what we find and what survived. I wonder, if that explains a sort of pervading darkness in these stories.
Well, and listening to you now makes me think, well, all right, we know the stories have to have been told at or shortly after this particular period of time because of what it contains. But that doesn't mean it wasn't told, 10,000 years after that time, about that time, from the perspective of people in the future who said, my gosh, look at how greedy these people were. You got to watch out for greed. Look at all the destruction it can cause.
Yeah.
And so the people in the time themselves, in the stories themselves, probably wouldn't take that perspective.
Right.
might is right and power over is the only thing that'll get you anywhere. And it's, a violent and dangerous world. And if you don't want to become prey, then you have to be a predator.
Right. Yeah, so I have to read a quote that's from George Mann, so same writer, different book. This is from his middle grade novel, Quest for the Hidden City, which is part of phase 2 of the High Republic book. So we're talking centuries to millennia after the stories we've been talking about here. And it's some characters. I love this book, by the way. And it's one of the reasons why I think people should not skip the middle grade books, even though you think it might not
absolutely
be.
not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not. I mean, I was just talking about the Tiffany Aching series in Discworld, and that was supposedly written for children, and it's some of the best writing he ever did. So
yeah, exactly. And they're easy reads too, so all the more reason to just give it a try.
Mm-hmm.
But so this is some characters who are also, this story is set, like as I said, hundreds to thousands of years later during the Age of Exploration, looking back on the histories that they're uncovering, because these are explorers on the Outer Rim. And say, so it's true. Everything I've been told about our history is a lie. Yes, this character has just found a mural inside an old temple that shows a different origin of her species than she had been told. And Dietrich says, no, it was so long ago, thousands of years. Stories change in the telling. Histories are rewritten, events forgotten. It doesn't mean that anyone lied, just that it's been so long they've forgotten the truth. And the warnings, said Spence. They've forgotten those too. The reasons for these tapestries. Your ancient ancestors were trying to warn future generations about the mines and the minerals. The stories, the tales told to us as children, they were true. They're all that's left of the real memories of what happened here.
Well, of course, there you get to one of my favorite topics for discussion, which is there's a difference between being true and being fact.
Mm-hmm.
And neither of those things are lies.
Right.
Necessarily. But there are certain truths that cannot be, quote unquote, proven or demonstrated factually.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot factually prove that I love someone.
Mm-hmm.
By my words, my actions, my so forth, it becomes evident, apparent. But love cannot be measured with a thermometer or a telescope or calculated with scales or any of those things, right? So we need both truth and fact.
Yeah, and in history, we often say it's told by the victors, but it's so open to the perspective, the interpretation of different perspectives.
I might also say history is told by the survivors.
Yes, that's true.
I mean, certainly those with power are the ones who are most likely to tell stories, if only because they have the leisure time to do so and to write them down and encode them and so forth. But even those who are not telling official stories are still telling stories about the past and about what happened. And we are constantly revising our histories because we constantly learn new things. And I speak as an historian by training. And a lot of people get upset about that because they want the past to be past. They want something in their life to be factual and unquestioning. There's just not a lot, certainly about human experience, that you can say that about. And so, you start developing these terms like revisionist and history through lenses, Marxism, feminism, and so on and so on. Those things are fine because as you use a new lens to look at something, you discover new things about it. Revisionist uses a dirty word, says, leave my history alone.
Right.
It also says, we need to know what really happened. And we left out a heck of a lot of material. And think of every time I had students reading anything, whether it was, a research assignment or a story or anything, I said, ask yourself whose voices are not here.
Right.
Whose voices are not represented, are not set alongside the other voices that you're hearing. And what would that do to your understanding of the story?
Right.
Or the text or the tale or whatever.
Yeah, I made a Twitter post recently. I said something like, it haunts me to know that, after the zombie apocalypse, future archaeologists might find objects of mine and think that my behavior is applicable to everybody. Like they'll find my mortar and pestle, test the residue, and be like, wow, people ate a lot of lavender. Like, no, just one weirdo in Amsterdam did.
Well, I mean, any sensible, thoughtful archaeologist, explorer, historian, whoever, is going to recognize that.
Right.
That in a sense, it's almost impossible to tell a history. You may tell stories of people. You may tell histories of peoples.
Mm-hmm.
And even this seemingly factual timeline of first this happened and then this happened, that's the factual. It's not the truth necessarily.
Yeah.
Because it leaves out all the implications for all the different groups of people who were involved with that particular process.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I wonder factually for this. I don't know. I think it's cool to have a planet with a kyber crystal core. Mm-hmm. I guess why not? That's a mineral that's in, yeah. And then, so it's been corrupted somehow. So we see at various points in the timeline, we see the bleeding of kyber crystals.
Right.
So what event could have happened that would put so much rage and dark side energy through a planet? Or I guess did the planet already start like something like Dathomir, which is leaks dark energy? Are some plants just dark on the inside no matter what? They and how did that happen? Must have been long before this.
Well, and much depends upon your definition of dark, doesn't it?
Yeah. Yeah. And could it have just been something, you think if you have a group that's together, that's in a confined space, like they're in a spaceship for whatever amount of time going through the edges of space, and could fighting just break out?
Of course.
And it's exaggerated.
And, those kinds of stories go all the way back to the earliest exploration of the globe by ship.
Mm-hmm.
And shipwrecked sailors, and, did they resort to cannibalism or not? And what was it that led them to steer the ship directly to a reef and be destroyed? And, did they all go crazy from drinking seawater because there was no more fresh water to drink? That's certainly been a part of the human psyche for a very long time.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine what stories we could hear from the Paleolithic and Neolithic times.
Yeah.
If those peoples had been able to record their stories, I would love to know.
I think
what they would have to tell us.
We overestimate the differences when we look at past peoples, and I think we would be shocked to find out just how, they had different, much more limited technology and development of many ideas and things like that. But they were just at the end, we are animals, and they were people, our type of animals, trying to get by and make something of their life.
You find a grave with flowers in it.
Mm-hmm.
Flowers buried with the person in that grave.
Yeah.
That's my brother or sister.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
We are related. We are connected.
Yeah.
And you find the thigh bone of a coyote that has holes placed in spatial relationship to one another, and it's hollow.
It's an instrument.
Yes, you could insist that some predatory creature had just bitten in just the right places.
Right. Very
sure,
evenly.
You go ahead and do that.
Smooth it down. Yeah.
It's a flute.
Mm-hmm.
A Paleolithic flute.
Yeah.
I'm a musician. They're a musician. We are connected.
Right.
However, so long ago that I couldn't begin to comprehend what that connection would be like. But at least I know we could sing to each other and we could offer each other flowers.
Yeah.
And we could communicate.
Yeah. So as much as the stories might have morphed, and we don't even know at what point these are necessarily being told. I guess he made the Luke and Leia comment, so let's assume we're talking around 0 BBY, around the original trilogy time. Or just before. So we have no idea how much they might have twisted and whatever in the telling along the way, but it is, again, when we say human in the Star Wars case, we mean all the species, all the, sentient species. Yeah. Yeah, but there's a humanity, even in the Sith side.
Yes. The 360 perspective on humanity and what it is to be human, and what is light side and dark side.
Did you have any other quotes or thoughts you wanted to shout out about the article, this story?
Yeah. Why do we humans love to frighten ourselves?
Mm-hmm.
You would probably be able to answer that question.
I definitely have a better understanding of it.
Offer us.
Well,
something.
So I think in my case, and I'm going to get personal here for a moment. In my case, so I have an anxiety disorder, and I've had this since I was a child. And it's not something, especially, it's something that's people are becoming more aware of now. But of course, like I was having crazy nightmares every night, not even having seen horror movies yet. Just about like animals eating my family, and it was just the anxiety, because this is what anxiety is. It's a primordial response in us in terms of like how to the fight or flight, basically. But we've gotten bad at turning it off. And it's something that can be passed down through generations, that can reflect prior trauma of generations. This is a real thing called epigenetics.
Yes.
So
very real.
So then it's like, how do you deal with that? And one thing that oddly worked when I was a child was I accidentally started watching horror movies because I refused to go to bed one night when my parents wanted to watch Jaws. And this was, back in HBO days before there was streaming. So they're finally like, fine. But if you have nightmares tonight, and I slept through the night, and they're like, oh my God, you slept through the night tonight.
Wow.
So they started to experiment more with that. And I played video games and stuff. And then, so I went on to study psychology. And one of the groups of studies that have interested me most has been those exploring, like particularly in video games, you get a sense of empowerment through it. So I started my nightmares. I started lucid dreaming more. So when these monsters showed up, I could take care of them. I could like blast energy at them, and and that's also why I like superhero stuff when I was a kid too. Like it's like, oh, I'm Storm, I'm blowing you away. And yeah, so for me, it was a helpful tool in that way. I think there's also obviously the adrenaline factor. I appreciate the makeup and the artistry, and
agency seems to be a big piece of it. And I guess it depends on the type of story. I mean, if it does wind up that the young girl flees from Bluebeard's castle and is safe again, that's wonderful, because she used her agency. She opened the door. She found out the dangers. She left in time, or someone came and intervened in time on her behalf, whatever. But it's always been a question for me, because I can frighten myself so easily. I don't need to watch a horror film, and yet can find a sense of agency. And I guess that just comes with time.
I mean, watching horror films makes me less frightened, to the point where I've been accused of being a plant on a ghost tour because I wasn't jumping.
Well, and I suppose it much depends too on what your source of inner fear comes from. I mean, if you grow up in an environment which is threatening and scary.
Well, I didn't. I definitely did not. I definitely grew up in a very safe environment. So my anxiety was completely misplaced. It was just a chemical reaction.
Right. Whereas I did grow up in that kind of an environment. And so, as I say, I've never needed to scare myself. I've never needed other things to scare me, because I have sufficiently active imagination and experience that, you don't need to create it for me. So I don't really tend to love things that frighten me that much. I mean, even jump scares, kind of take me a while to get my heart back down to a good level. But I think we're representations of just the two of us of the whole human experience, on the spectrum there. And it's certainly true that people have been sitting around campfires and scaring each other for a very long time. And
yeah.
Some people sleep better and some people wake up with screaming.
And sometimes, yeah, it was, especially when I was younger, it was hard for me to understand that sometimes I really did scare someone with a story. And, I was like, but I don't like, it was just a story,
Yeah. Yeah. But again, I think if you feel you have control over it, if you are the storyteller, that gives you some control over the horror, the terror of it, the risk, the danger, if you will.
But I apologize to anyone I might have scared as a kid with my campfire stories. I was a Girl Scout, so.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I don't remember hearing ghost stories around the campfire, though. But I did develop a temperature of 101, and my mother came and got me back early.
Oh, no.
I don't know if that was self-produced or just I brought the virus with me and it manifested there or what. I don't think I caught it from anybody else.
Any other quotes or ideas you want to shout out for this story or any of the stories?
No, I don't think so. I think they've taken us to some really fun places, and that's terrific. I hope that listeners feel that way too.
Yeah. No, thank you so much for talking through this with me, because it does. Even just, I went through and read these stories and obviously studied them perhaps a little too seriously, but that's what I'm here for. But
you
then
took a scholar's eye to them, and it's very helpful.
And then talking with you has helped me get a deeper level of understanding even. So,
I'm glad.
Yeah, and I think it's just, I'm glad that we have these episodes are set near the beginning of the timeline, because they offer a nice framework for just thinking about storytelling in general, which applies to all the types of stories to come in all the eras.
Well, and another thing I'm just thinking of as you're speaking is we tell each other stories so that each of us has a little more perspective of someone else.
Yeah.
So the more we tell each other stories, our own stories and other stories, and the more we listen to other people's stories, the wider understanding we have, like I was saying before about history.
Yeah.
The more versions you have of an event, the greater understanding you have of the event as a whole. And the same thing with stories. Stories are, I guess, partly a means of taking control of the world. And if you don't like what's happening, you change the story. Stories absolutely direct our world far more, I think, than they always should. You can tell if somebody is living a story if they're kind of going along making choices and having expectations, and you say, well, why are you choosing this path? Well, that's what we're supposed to do, isn't it? Well, who told you that? Well, there's this TV series, or there's this favorite series of novels you read as a kid, or there's the history, or there's whatever it happens to be, your epigenetic inheritance.
Yeah.
All of those things can come together to guide your actions. But if we have a better understanding of each other's stories, then my experience has been one is less and less likely to be positing heroes and villains. You don't have to take them away necessarily altogether. You still have characters who are at the center of stories. But you can see that there could potentially be broader perspectives than just your own. And that, I think, is always a healthy thing.
Well, I noticed that as humans, so our ability to tell stories is one thing that separates us as, a quote unquote special type of animals. But also we are just so addicted to finding the narrative in everything that, it's that word narrative. You hear it all the time. And on the business side of things, that it's,
okay.
What's the narrative? And that's almost more important than the facts of the events.
Absolutely.
Like, how are people reacting? How is this being interpreted? So stories have such a power, but that's why, the people who are able to shape the stories can often wield a lot of power. The people who own the media, things like that. I think that stories both reflect and control us, and they are, to me, along with music, the most human things about us.
Yeah. I mean, thus far, we don't have any evidence that there are any other storytelling animals but ourselves.
So. Yeah. I mean, I guess they tell stories in the sense of like predator, 3 clicks that way.
Sure. I mean, you teach, you instruct. I mean, even trees communicate disease warnings to each other through the mycelium, through the rootlet structures down below. So there is communication and interaction and so forth.
Yeah, we talked about that with the that first myth of Batu.
Exactly.
About the trees, yeah. Oh, any final thoughts on the myths and the legends or the folk tales or whatever we're calling them, the stories of the Old Republic?
Well, I'm sure there could be many more final thoughts, but I think we've gone to some lovely places today, and maybe listeners will write in with their own stories and
yes, please
observations about what we talked about today.
Yeah, will be an Old Republic feedback episode, but also there will be another one coming in the future. So please do send in your thoughts about everything we've been discussing in the Old Republic.
Yes, please.
Great. Well, thank you again, Marilyn.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me. I always love to talk about this stuff, as you know. And I hope that listeners have enjoyed listening to it.
We love getting you talking about this stuff. May the Force be with you.
And with you also.
All right. And I am here with Deadeye Jedi Bob. How are you doing, Bob?
I'm very well. Glad to be back.
The people haven't heard your voice on this feed for a few weeks now. So what did you think about the end of the Acolyte, spoiler-free because we're earlier in the timeline?
I was really impressed with what we got, and I keep hoping that we'll get some news about the show being renewed for a second season because,
yes,
wow, yes, please, indeed.
Yeah, no, it was a really fun show. And I mean, fun for especially those of us who, I know your one ongoing complaint was that it maybe didn't get dark enough.
Yeah.
So this episode, you haven't been able to hear my discussion with Marilyn, but I think you'll like this episode. It's all about the Sith
and the very nice
dark myths of the Old Republic. But yeah, we're here. We're gonna talk through we got some emails and feedback in about our coverage of the Old Republic so far. So I just wanted to read them with you and get your responses. And yeah, I think we have some audiobook recommendations coming up. But first, we're going to start with Abby. Abby said, just listened. I can't stress it enough how good a podcast this is. Thank you, Abby. I'm bashful reading that. So informative. For those who didn't read any books or comics, only saw the movies and animations, it sure fills in some huge gaps in my knowledge. And yeah, Elysia mentioned the Legends Lounge pod, and I feel a bit ashamed that even as I am a part of a Discord group with them, the other main topic is A Song of Ice and Fire. I never listen to the pod, mainly because every time I check the Star Wars channel on there, I have absolutely no idea what they are talking about. I have to go give it a try. I suppose never assume. From the convos only on the Discord, I was thinking that I probably wouldn't get it as it's a book talk this and comic that, might as well be in Wookiee language. Are you familiar with Legends Lounge?
Yeah, I've been really needing to start listening to that one. I've been doing a lot of Lorehounds listening lately, but yeah, I'm going to have to start that one.
Well, that's a good choice, yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, yeah, no affiliation with us. I just think that it's a nice complimentary one to this podcast because there are some legend stuff that we have talked about and we'll talk about. Like Bob and I have been talking about a Darth Plagueis episode from the book.
Oh, yes.
But yeah, mostly this is primarily canon focused, this podcast. So, and that's a nice way to read the books without reading them if you don't have time to read the whole thing.
True.
Yeah. Marilyn says, hello, Elysia and Bob. Good episode on the Old Republic. Thanks. I found a couple things of particular interest, but first, a speculation. You commented on the fact that the Jedi went from white to brown in their clothing during this period. My first thought is, well, it's easier to wash, isn't it? Or maybe it was more their grounded soil hippie phase. I mean, I think that is because we see in the Acolyte that they wear the white in the temple and the brown on missions, and there probably is something to that, that the brown hide stains if you're in the forests of KOTOR.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah. Marilyn says, as I listened to your description of the Jedi Council chamber, I thought that it could also apply to the Senate chamber, at least around the Skywalker era, which is the only time I know of what that chamber looks like. Yeah, in the Senate chamber, how early do we really see it in full effect? But it pretty much looks the same. A major difference is that the Senate is in the dark and buried away from the folks that they serve, rather than being high up above the folks the Jedi serve. Both could be said to be out of balance, particularly if one tried to function without the other. And interestingly, she wrote this before the Acolyte, so before we saw... Well, yeah, this is a minor spoiler for the Acolyte, but there's some sense of friction between the two, the Jedi and the Senate.
Oh yeah, I would say definitely.
Are you a fan of like the Senate side of Star Wars storytelling?
I do enjoy that. When I first started exploring Star Wars via the books as a kid, it didn't make a lot of sense. But of course, as I've gotten older, that part of Star Wars has begun to appeal to me more and more. So yeah, I really like a lot of the political stuff in Star Wars nowadays.
Yeah, we won't spoil any plots about what happens later, but we can acknowledge that there's a character tied to the Senate called Mon Mothma who shows up later. And we just found out, Bob, you told me just like yesterday, I think, that they just announced a new trilogy in part from her perspective.
Yeah. I think the first book is going to be focusing on Mon, and then the next two are going to be focusing on, I believe it's possibly Saw and Bail.
Right.
So they're really important characters later on in the timeline. And the trilogy is Reign of the Empire. The first book is Mask of Fear, I believe. So that'll be due out in 2025 or thereabouts. The first book, I think they said February, possibly January.
I think you're right about February.
February,
or maybe
okay.
I don't know. I was just looking at a bunch of like release dates for Phase 3 stuff in the High Republic, so maybe I'm getting it confused with that. But
that's okay.
But yeah, those are three different perspectives of a senator, a diplomat, and we won't say too much about the other one.
Right.
So Marilyn continues, to the best of my knowledge, the Foundation books did not have two planetary bodies sharing an atmosphere. I could be mistaken, though. I'm far more familiar with the original trilogy than I am with all the other books, some of which I've only read once. Someone more familiar with the Foundation books than myself, please write in and correct me. And yeah, this is because we talked about Foundation, the TV show, had such a planet where they were sharing an atmosphere with the moon and animals migrating between them. And I think that might come from Star Wars. I mean, that happens in Star Wars Legends. So I'm think maybe that's where they got it from, perhaps.
Possibly, yeah.
Marilyn says, on the subject of Audible books, during my library degree study in the late 1970s, I did an internship with the Library for the Blind and Physically Handicapped in New York City, where audiobooks were actually special LPs, needing a special player, which each patron would have to borrow. The LPs would then be sent through the mail upon request, rather a slow process. I had the pleasure of seeing the very first ever Kurzweil machine, which can read any print text by placing it face down on a glass panel to be scanned. It looked rather like a photocopy machine in the early days, and it was considered a technological marvel. We did eventually get one for the library I worked for many, many years, thanks to the generosity of the parents of a student with dyslexia who learned much better if texts were read to them. I think it has now been superseded by other technology. So, yeah, are you familiar with, did you know about this? Because 70s is before you were born, but.
Yeah, I did have a Kurzweil reader when I was in college, and then after when I moved to Texas. I think it worked hand in hand with a website called Bookshare, and yeah, so I'm very familiar with that technology.
How did that work?
Well, I think in terms of how it worked back in 2010, 2011 or thereabouts, you just went to the website and it would just read you the various books that you choose, like text to speech. So you didn't have to scan anything in. Everything was just uploaded by 2011 or thereabouts. But I still really find it fascinating because there are some EU or Legends books that they don't have on audio yet. And bookshare.org, they'll upload older titles. I think you pay around $49 or $50 a month to use the service. But
wow.
Yeah. I'm sorry, a year, not a month.
Okay. That's much better.
Yeah, it is much better.
Jesus, just Audible's even less than that.
Oh yeah, quite a bit less.
No, thankfully, because it's true. It's not just for the visually impaired, but also, people with dyslexia, people who just like people with attention deficit disorder often prefer, books being read to them. There's just people who want to like listen to books while they're doing other things. I know you like to read while you're cleaning or biking or.
Oh yes.
Yeah, I do my podcast during that time. Marilyn, continue. Oh, yeah. And thank you, Marilyn, for sharing that history. That's actually super interesting. I don't know how much you knew about the 70s technology.
Not very much. So it's been fascinating to listen to what Marilyn wrote in.
Yeah. Marilyn says, you've been throwing out all kinds of names of all kinds of characters, creatures, and force users that are unfamiliar to me, but the one that really made me sit up and take notice was the Dagon Masters. Please tell me more. That sounds a lot like the sort of force use that I am most interested in hearing about. I see from Wikipedia that there were 2 episodes about them in the Clone Wars, so I rather suspect you're going to tell me that that's all we know about them. If so, that's a shame. Looking forward to the next episode. Keep that information flowing. All the best, Marilyn. And yeah, sorry, Marilyn. But I mean, as we've seen with the Acolyte, with the witches, and as we've seen with especially the High Republic books and things like that, there does seem to be going back more into that weirdness of the Clone Wars, of the Legends, where, weirdness with air quotes, that the different types of force users, right?
Right. I do hope that we get a lot more in terms of the quote unquote weirdness factor, because it is a fascinating bit of Star Wars that we don't know much about. And I would like to learn a bit more because there's very little info out there about that. So,
right. Yeah, it feels like whenever we get somebody like other than say the Night Sisters or, then it's just a little tease. And then I'm like, well, yeah, flesh it out. Tell me more.
Yeah. That's exactly how I am. Yeah.
Okay, so we have our last piece of feedback is from Stu, Duve71, friend of the pod. Stu says, hi, Bob. Managed to start listening to the Star Wars Canon Timeline podcast. I'm starting to get to the end of my audiobook Odyssey of the Wheel of Time, 3 books left. And I know that he wrote this a little bit ago, and he's now finished one of those books. And I want to get into the Star Wars audiobooks. I've read a few over the 40 plus years of being a fan, with the most recent being the Aftermath trilogy and Darth Plagueis. Being as there are hundreds, could you recommend 1 or 2 miniseries or standalone in different eras?
Cool. Well, of course, with the High Republic era, I would say Light of the Jedi is a very good jumping off point there, because that kind of gets the whole ball rolling in the High Republic.
That's literally, the jumping off point they intended. Yeah.
Yeah. Then in terms of, I guess, the new canon timeline, I really liked the first book in the Thrawn trilogy, the new Thrawn trilogy, just titled Thrawn. That kind of shows you how a certain character joins the Empire. So that's another one that I really enjoyed from the new timeline. In terms of the events following Return of the Jedi, one of my favorites has to be Shadow of the Sith, which I hope we eventually do get to talking about on the podcast. I think it sets a lot of things up for the sequel trilogy, and that's. I think I've read that one twice so far, and I'll probably be reading it a third time because it answers a lot of questions that I had after seeing The Rise of Skywalker. in terms of the sequel trilogy era, I also really enjoyed the movie novelization of Rise of Skywalker. You get to climb inside the heads of characters you didn't really get to do in terms of the movies. So the final novelization in that trilogy there.
Yeah. No, and I would add jumping back to the Old Republic, but on the Legends side, because that's all we really have in the Old Republic. I would add the Darth Bane trilogy as essential reading / listening.
Yes, I wasn't sure if we were just covering canon or Legends, but I would have certainly added Bane, and I'm going to go ahead and do that because that's another one that I constantly go back to. A lot of action in that trilogy if you're into lightsaber duels. And when I start that trilogy, I can't put it down. It's usually like a massive read through whenever I do Darth Bane.
Yeah, I mean, it's good, captivating storytelling. And even though it's Legends, I think it tells you a lot that's applicable to new canon as well. And they're definitely plucking things from there too.
Oh, yes, I would say so.
Yeah. All right. Well, any other Old Republic thoughts you want to throw out there?
I can't wait for more.
Yeah. Give us canon, Old Republic stuff. Other than the myths. The myths are great. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Well, hopefully we'll be jumping back to this point in the timeline to talk about it more. But the listeners at home will be hearing from you next. I think in the very next episode we're going to be doing some feedback from the High Republic era and talking through some recent Comic-Con announcements on the Star Wars publishing side. Good news for Acolyte fans.
Very good news.
All right. Thank you, Bob.
Thank you.
Okay, and I have now here Marcin back with me because we have some Knights of the Old Republic feedback. Definitely a lot of people having a lot of fun nostalgia with this game, with thoughts about it. I'm sure you're not surprised, Marcin.
No, these are very popular games. I'm not surprised that people remember about them and have some fond memories of the way they played.
Yeah. I think you seem to have some fun, just getting back into it, remembering.
I actually I got back to the Knights of the Old Republic MMO, and I actually managed to play a little bit more of it, and still didn't get very far, but I did appreciate it a little bit more, and the way how the story is a little bit more richer than most of MMOs, I guess. So
maybe not the mechanics, but the story at least.
Yeah. I mean, perhaps not the mechanics of trying to make you spend more on some cosmetics or things like that. But if you ignore all that, it's surprisingly engaging.
Yeah, I do need to do that one. I have to admit, I have not made it past the character creation screen on that one.
Yeah.
But we have some feedback here so the first one's from Sub-Zero, who says, I played KOTOR, and again, KOTOR, Knights of the Old Republic, get it? Anyway, I played KOTOR front to back half a dozen times, and I could never go full dark side. I thought about it numerous times, and I just couldn't make myself do it. But that's your favorite way to play again, Marcin.
Yeah. Actually, I don't think I managed to go full light side. Well, perhaps maybe once, but I'm not sure if I finished that run. I definitely finished the full dark side and sort of gray area run.
Right.
That are most memorable in my case.
I play RPGs or I play table D&D. I like to play chaotic good. So I would say that I usually play gray leaning good, but it is. You made me want to dip my toe a little deeper in the dark just by the descriptions of how it changes your appearance, and just to see that. Yeah, and just because to see it changes up the story. So Sub-Zero continues, I think it's my favorite game of all time. I loved everything about it. It felt like you were experiencing a full Star Wars book. I'm not great at real-time game combat, so I enjoyed the fight mechanism in this game, where you get to briefly pause and set your moves. I still remember the first time I saw the Revan reveal. It was so cool. I really hope the KOTOR story makes it into live action or animation canon at some point. Yeah, a lot of talk about that. And a lot of people, would you rather see this story as a live action adaptation or an animated adaptation?
Yeah, hard to say. To be honest, perhaps live action would be the coolest, but at the same time, yeah, it would. It's probably much harder to pull off, and then yeah, it would definitely be scrutinized quite a lot. So it would have to be done well. I would say probably both. Yeah, definitely. I'd like to see animation and then perhaps somewhere down the way,
a live action,
a live action as well, or perhaps some series based on KOTOR or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it would be cool since we're filming this or recording this right after we talked about some Star Wars Visions episodes of the Old Republic. So we were just talking about the Journey to the Dark Head. That would be a really cool animated style for this story.
Oh yeah, definitely, yeah.
No. So Sub-Zero continues, concludes, I am the guy who can never skip a side quest. I want to explore every nook and cranny, so always by the end, I'm so overpowered. The final boss was not much of an issue. That's how I play too. I recall getting those pearls from the crate dragons, and it gave your saber a huge boost. They showed the pearl in Mando, and I was like, that'll never fit in a lightsaber. I guess pearls can be different sizes because they can get bigger and bigger if they grow.
Maybe. Depends on the side of the dragon.
But do you remember the pearls from the crate dragons?
In the game? Yeah, I'm not sure.
Okay.
Didn't really stand out. Although I'm the same way. I do have to finish every side quest that I discover. So it's likely that I did finish that one as well. Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. Everything that's in this comment.
I have to admit that I am a cheating gamer sometimes later. Like when I played the Jedi games much later than it takes me longer to get to games because it just takes so long and there's so much other content I'm consuming. So by the time I get to the games, a lot of other people have played them, and I'll finish a planet and then like I'll do a little looky-loo and be like, did I miss anything? So Ian said, yeah, I have to force myself to go dark side / evil in any RPG. KOTOR is one of my favorite games of all time, and Revan is one of my 2 or 3 favorite characters to play, the other being Hawk from Dragon Age 2, another BioWare game. Have you played Dragon Age 2?
No, only Dragon Age 1, actually, and it is one of my favorite RPGs as well. It was still on the cusp between old school RPGs based on Baldur's Gate, but kind of elevated to the new to the new style of RPGs, more like based on Mass Effect with better graphics and updated mechanics. So actually, Dragon Age 1 is one of my favorite RPGs because it's a stepping stone between the 2 eras of RPGs with better graphics and better production values in general, but still quite a rich story and quite rich mechanics behind it. So I've read that Dragon Age 2 was a little bit more action oriented, a little bit more simplified, but I'd love to play it too. Yeah.
Yeah. I have to give a shout out to my friend who goes by Zareen online, and she's obsessed with the Dragon Age games, and so she got me too. I have now procured all of them. Actually, I got my sister to give me some of them as like a Christmas birthday gift. I don't remember. So there's 3 out now, and then there's a 4th coming this year. I know people are really excited about. But that's, again, it's on I have to catch up on other stuff. Like, I'm still playing Baldur's Gate 3 right now. So, but I'm really, really looking forward to that because people really seem to love that world and the storytelling. And
it's a very rich and interesting fantasy world, and especially take on magic. I love playing magic characters and the way how magic is explained there, and the whole background is super interesting.
Yeah, and just if anyone's confused, Dragon Age games, again, they're not Star Wars. They're just made by BioWare, as Eon said. Are you a fan of BioWare's game mechanics, game style in general?
Yeah. That I love Mass Effect series. It's a little bit more action oriented. It's a different style. Maybe RPG mechanics are not as developed there as in Dragon Age, but I love all three games, and I play them on different platforms, PC, Xbox. So definitely, I'd love to play the remake or the Mass Effect Legendary Edition or whatever. It's the enhanced graphics, but all three games in one package. Would love to play it one day.
Yeah. So Eon continues, I love KOTOR 2 and have even played through the restored content, but it's still somewhat fragmented. I've played through the Old Republic MMO on all 8 classes. Wow. What Marcin said about the quests is true, but I'm somewhat OCD, so I'm able to play through that. Best story, hands down, in the Old Republic is the Sith Empire Operative. It's kind of a spy story with multiple branching endings for the original game. It's written by Alexander Freed, who has written some Star Wars books. Oh, see, okay, this makes me want to play the game more. I mean, not that I didn't already want to play it, but this, I really want to play it because I know the outlines of the story, but I know it's so with the branching and all the layers, there's definitely a lot of story to explore there.
Yeah.
So Davey Max says, fun episode on the KOTOR games. I played KOTOR in fits and starts over multiple years on different platforms. The closest I ever came to finishing it was in 2020 during the pandemic, commuting on nearly empty trains. Oh, wow. Yeah. Davey Mack, by the way, lives in Japan. So I'm just thinking nearly empty trains in Japan is wow. He says, I never did complete it, though, as I just couldn't beat Moloch. And the way I'd been playing up to that point was not a good fit for the tactics that you need in that fight. So I eventually gave up and watched the endings on YouTube. Oh. Do you remember what the Moloch fight?
I remember, in general, I remember final fights in KOTOR, both the first one and the second one were quite challenging, which perhaps didn't really surprise me that much because usually final boss fights in RPGs are quite hard. Sometimes you run into the trap of developing your character the way you just want to develop, and somehow it might make it harder to actually finish the final boss. It's quite hard to balance the mechanics in those games, such large scope games in particular. I never had that with KOTOR, perhaps because I played mainly dark side and it was it's just simply more powerful. But I did have that with some RPGs like Final Fantasy VII or Icewind Dale, the first Icewind Dale, where I played those games before any YouTube videos, before any online guides, and I kind of experimented developing my characters the way I wanted, and that made it really hard to finish the final boss. So I definitely understand that pain.
I mean, I guess you probably always played as a male character.
No, actually not. I love female characters in all RPGs. Normally, the first playthrough I do is usually female character. Maybe sometime along the way I do the opposite, but somehow.
So Davey Mack, he says one interesting aspect I'm not sure as a parent if you play as a male character is how character dynamics change if you play as a female character. Like Karth, for example, comes off as a misogynist with some of his dialogue towards you. And the whole romance angle with Bastilla is just non-existent. Instead, there's a romance possibility with Karth, which I never pursued while playing because of the way he talked to me early in the game. Like, yes, know your worth.
Yeah, I have to say I'm not really
You don't do the
usually
romance side, you said, yeah.
not really. I mean, usually when it's about some, I like to play the character that's more stoic and more focused on the job. So usually when there's some line that suggests
like
flirty or suggests that there might be something more, usually I just brush it off, saying that we have more important things. There's galaxy at stake. Let's focus on the job or something like that. So usually I focus on that. But I guess that's the beauty of RPG games, that you can just choose whatever your character wants to be, and if you want to focus on fighting and saving the galaxy,
I mean, I say why not both?
Sure. Or then you can take a break and then just explore or the side quest or explore the relations with other characters as well. So
well, you know how I play. I sent you videos of in Baldur's Gate 3 of my character in Shadowheart on a cliff, having her moment.
Yes. Not safe for work.
So Davy Mack continues, but the Legends canon version of Revan and Bastilla being married, so the Legends version of Revan and Bastilla being married doesn't line up for people playing as female characters. Yeah. I mean, I hope if they're apparently remaking the game, as we talked about in the episode, I hope that they just let you romance Bastilla no matter what your gender is. Like, don't tell me what to do, game.
Well, it's still old school. 20 years ago. So.
And he says, though I do recall there being a mod out there that enabled it so you could still have the romance angle for the females. Female Revens with Bastilla. And also, a fun fact I picked up from another podcast is that Bastilla originally was meant to be Vima Sunrider, the daughter of Nomi Sunrider from the Tales of the Jedi comics. That's cool. And her battle meditation ability was a big thing in those books. Okay, I haven't read those books, but that's really good to know. And I should someday I'll catch up on the Legends books I haven't read. And KOTOR has the best gray Jedi and Jolie Bindo. I don't think we really talked about her much.
No, I don't think so.
But yeah, I mean, I think for the story, or for the game remake side of it, I would love for them to just update mostly the graphics, but also certain mechanics like that. And for the storytelling side of it, it would be cool. And I know this will make some people mad, but it would be cool if they made Revan more androgynous, to just kind of as a nod to this game playing mechanic.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, it's I don't know, in my impression, Sith are not really concerned about such lowly temptations of the flesh. They just want to focus on acquiring power by any means possible.
They still get down and dirty.
But it's more, I would say it's more decadent without really being concerned about gender or
no, but they're not they're not
sexual
necessarily
orientations. They just grab what they want.
Right. Well, I mean, I would say a Sith is as likely to be a misogynist as a Jedi. It's not inherent in the Sith mentality or anything.
Right.
Yeah. Or to care about gender is not. Yeah. The Sith is not about gender. It's about power.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's more about not really gender, but what they perceive as power and strong character that can earn their respect, perhaps, or that they can look at a bit more favorably, or the opposite, if there's someone who they see as weak and pathetic.
Yeah. Okay, so our last piece of feedback for this segment is Stu, who said, Really enjoying the timeline pods, managing to catch up on Lorehound's content. Listening to the episode with Marcin, I went back and thought about my my history of gaming in Star Wars. It really began with the classic Star Wars coin-op game. Many hours were frittered away, putting 50 pence into this sit-down version. The combo of hyper-fast gameplay and hearing the John Williams soundtrack with audio footage from the film was transformative for Teen Duve. This led to the Star Wars trilogy side scrollers on SNES, then on into PC and consoles. So here's my history, and I won't read it all out, but Marcin, I think this is pretty much everything you named and some more things besides.
Pretty much, yeah, and some more on top of that. So quite an impressive list, I would say.
And you want to shout out?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much on the list. I would say Dark Forces and definitely Jedi Outcast, Jedi Academy. These are one of my favorite, more action-oriented Star Wars games. Force Unleashed, yeah. I mean, that's also a classic. And yeah, of course, all the RPGs here, the Knights of the Old Republic. That's a very prominent place. Battlefront. I spent some time with Battlefront 2. Wasn't that much into Battlefront 1 because it didn't have single player, and I always prefer single player introduction to first person shooter games. So even if it's not that great, I always like to play through the campaign to learn about the mechanics of the first person shooter, and then get into multiplayer. And Battlefront 2 was perfect for that. And I did spend some. I'm not really that much into online first-person shooters, but I like the setting and I like the way how it was implemented in Battlefront 2. So I spent some hours playing on multiplayer maps, especially Galactic Domination, or I forgot the name of this game mode, but it was a match consisted of different levels where you were playing planet side, and then you're moving to the fight in the dreadnought up in the orbit, and you had to blow it up. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, Battlefront 2 is actually canon. I haven't played it at all because of that I'm not usually into like the shooter thing, but I do intend to at least dabble in it. It's set later in the timeline, so I want to at least give it a try before we get there. But it's good to know. I know that like there's some story element, like decent storytelling in that one too, right?
Yeah. It's pretty cool. The first the single player campaign is not bad, I would say. It has interesting characters, and it introduces certain interesting aspects that have never been shown or mentioned, at least to my knowledge. Perhaps in the books, or but not in more popular media, or let's say more mainstream media, I would say. So it was definitely fun to play through.
Yeah, and Stu wraps up and says, "Wow, that's a lot of Star Wars games. Where did I find the time?" Isn't that
sure? I think the same sometimes. I see here on the list there's GameCube. I never owned the GameCube, so.
Oh, okay. I had it when I was I was a teenager at the time. When did
although Rogue Squadron, I did hear quite a lot about. Those games. So.
And there's supposed to be the movie that's maybe been shelved or
Okay.
So we'll see. Well, but definitely, that is also set later in the timeline. So definitely talk about that then. But good to see that there's still a lot of love for Knights of the Old Republic out there. I think we're definitely going to see more Star Wars storytelling centered around it, just because of like people. It's still how many years later one of the Star Wars games people talk about most, or the series.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the best RPGs of all time, I would say. Not only Star Wars games. So, just I wish they just released the remake already.
Yeah. Well, okay. I'll be patient if it's going to be good, but that's one that I'm going to put at the top of my list when it comes out. Well, thank you, Marcin, for talking through the KOTOR stuff with me again. It's fun to revisit this part of the timeline.
Sure. Always a pleasure.
Thank you again for your ears. Next up, in 2 weeks, Marcin and Hjalti are back to talk through 2 Star Wars Visions episodes about Echoes of the Sith in the High Republic. And then I'll be joined by Bob again for our first mailbag of the High Republic. Once that episode releases, this one will be backdated to where it fits in the episode timeline. So if you're listening later, you'll be listening to this in the Second Era, the Old Republic, as intended, and probably the next episode in the list after this will be the High Republic overview, at least for a while. After that, I'll be continuing to release a few more flashback episodes set in the High Republic, including Part 1 of Season 2 of Young Jedi Adventures with Bob, and a shorter episode about the new Kalnaka comic. Then we will mostly just be moving forward in the timeline, wrapping up the High Republic with a talk with Bob again about the Legends Plagueis novel. And then it's time to kick off the next era, Era 4. Watch out for an overview episode on what to expect from that era after the Plagueis novel. But you can already check out the link to the episode list in the show notes to see what books and comics will be covered in the first episodes of Era 4 for anyone who wants to read ahead. And Canon Padawan and Storyzins, look out for that extra Darth Nihilus episode in your Supercast feeds in October. Anyone else who wants access to the Supercast feed will find that link in the show notes. The Canon Padawan timeline grants you earlier ad-free access to episodes, a timeline and podcast release order, and extras like the Spooktober special. The Storyzin level combines access to both the Canon Padawan feed and the Woolshift Dust Book Club, linked to my other podcast, for a discounted price. The book club is currently covering all of the Silo books and stories with a Season 1 rewatch focusing on book spoilers coming next month to ramp up for Season 2, which begins November 15th on Apple TV Plus and will be covered weekly on the public feed with more bonuses for book club members. A special thank you to new Storyzins Ken W. and Lestu. And on the rest of the network, on the Lorehounds feed, Rings of Power is in full swing, so you can check out numerous weekly episodes for that, especially for Lorehound subscribers. And Agatha is kicking off, and it's wickedly delightful. We already have our first episodes breakdown out. And also The Penguin on HBO. It's a very different flavor. Think DC Sopranos, but it's so good that we've decided to expand our coverage past the single one-shot. So look out also for that and for one-shots for Alien and Beetlejuice 2 in the Lorehounds feed, with a lot more to come over the next few months. Do also check out the newest member of the Lorehounds network, Nevermind the Music. Mark is a music professor, and his colleague and friend Nicole teaches psychology. Together, they offer new insights into songs you love or will enjoy discovering with an irreverent tone and a quick runtime. I'll add that link in the show notes for this episode as well. Do go and check them out. And see you back here in a couple of weeks to get back into the High Republic with a Legends look at Star Wars Visions, Season 1, Episode 7, The Elder, and Season 2, Episode 9, Owl's Song. Until then, nighty-night, and don't let the Darth Sybaris bite.